Welcome, everybody, back to the Rural Electric Cooperative Co-lab. My name is Tom Llewellyn. I'm the Executive Director at Shareable. We are a working partner of the Rural Power Coalition, which is hosting this 8-week series. Thank you for everyone who is joining us for another session. And anybody who's coming in for the first time today, welcome. We're glad to have you. Today's collab is going to be focused on elections, and we'll be building upon last week's session, which was focused on on engaging member owners. So we're going to do a quick round robin of introductions for all of our speakers, and I'm going to start, and I'm going to make sure I get it highlighted. Here we go. We're going to start with David. If you want to just come on in and introduce yourself.
Yeah. David Stokely. I'm with Renew Missouri. We're a not-for-profit advocacy organization for renewable energy and energy efficiency in Missouri, of course.
Great. And next up, we've got Alex.
Hi, I'm Alex. I am here in Alaska. I'm the Climate and Clean Energy Program Manager for the Alaska Center. I'm in Anchorage, and I work on our utility elections, and I'm excited to talk about that today.
Welcome, Alex. And finally, we've got Rachel.
Hi, everyone. My name's Rachel. I'm also in Alaska, and right now Alex and I are in the same city, but I live in Palmer, and I work in kind of a consultant role on a couple campaigns across Alaska on utility elections.
Excellent. Well, we're going to hear from all three speakers today. There's going to be a series of kind of an introduction to cooperative elections. Following that, we'll get to hear a few different case studies, and then after that, we'll have a Q&A for all three speakers. And so, with that, I'm going to pass it off to Rachel to get us started.
Great. So I was putting together a slide of just review information that I think we'll all need to know to talk about elections, but I thought maybe it would be a little more fun if we did an interactive review. So I have just a couple questions, and if anyone is feeling drawn to participate, you can put your answers in the chat. I don't think everyone can unmute yourself, so maybe we'll just go with chat for now, and then we have questions later we can unmute. But the first question is, how do you become a member owner of an electric co-op? Yes, you have to pay an electric bill. So you can't actually get in membership any other way. And so this is something that we'll talk about later, but renters aren't eligible to be members in their electric co-op unless they are the person with the name on the electric bill. Sometimes there's only one person in the household who's actually a member, even if the whole house is using electricity, things like that. But to become a member, you have to pay a bill. And who makes decisions about the things like where the co-op's power comes from and how much member owners are paying for it? Board of Directors. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, so the board is making all kinds of decisions that impact ratepayers, like where their power is coming from, how much they're paying for it, all kinds of different rate structures and things like that all come down from the board. And how do you get onto the board of directors? This is what we're here to talk about today. You get elected by the member owners. So that's a big part of being a member owner, is you are eligible to vote in your co-op elections. So a couple things about co-op elections that make them different from other elections that you might be engaging on or have worked on in the past. These are private elections. They are not publicly held seats of office. So they are C3 fund compliant. You don't have to be registered as a C4 organization in order to work on them. there's no financial reporting involved with these elections. And so that works for us. That also works for the other side. It makes it really hard to know who your opponents are working with, but it also means that like anyone can donate to candidates that are running for these elections. Any organizations can support people who are running for these elections, and there's no reporting involved in that. Other things about private elections are that people can hold public seats and private seats at the same time without any conflict of interest. So someone can be on the school board, they can be on an assembly, and they can still hold one of these co-op director board positions. And there's also no regulating entity for these elections. And so if you have a problem with the way that elections are running in your community, it makes it really difficult to deal with that, because the only people that you can bring that problem up to are the internal staff at your cooperative. People don't know about these elections, so there's a really big opportunity for impact. We have just last year, we had an election in Alaska that was decided by a 12-vote margin after a runoff election. And that seat ended up getting the first woman onto that board, the youngest board member by significant margin, and also shifted the majority of that board with just like a handful of votes. All those things were changed. But it's also really hard to get people engaged in these elections because there's so little information that they already have. So instead of just telling people to vote, you're going to have to tell them you're a member of this cooperative. That's what this means. You have access to voting for these board of directors. This is what the board of directors does. This is why you should care about it. And this is how you vote. It's not just a regular election that you can show up at your ballot box on a certain day for. So there's like a lot of steps to get people engaged in these elections. So it's a pretty long-term battle, but has like a huge payoff at the end. The cooperatives don't always want you to engage in them. You can give them the benefit of the doubt that they're probably just not used to people engaging with their elections, but you'll have to dig really hard to find the information that you'll need. We still routinely have to ask our cooperatives when voting starts for their elections, because they will wait until like a month or two before the election starts to actually post any information about it. Candidate application materials are hard to find, and it varies significantly depending on what co-op you're running for. None of them are the same. So here in Alaska, we have 4 major cooperatives that have elections every year. And just in our state, how you vote is different in every cooperative. Some of them have only online voting. Some of them have online, mail-in, and in person. Some of them have just online and mail-in. When you vote is different. Each of our utility cooperatives has a different length of voting time. Sometimes it's 4 weeks, sometimes it's 6 weeks. When like the actual time of year that our elections is different. Usually it's in the spring, but we have some elections start in March, some start in May, go until June. How you get on the ballot is different in every cooperative. Some of our cooperatives have nominating committees where you have to apply to a certain group of people, and then they will decide whether or not you get on the ballot. Sometimes you have the opportunity to apply by petition, so you have to get like 50 signatures from your neighbors to get on the ballot. Sometimes it's just an application that you have to fill out, and then you get put on the ballot automatically. Who's eligible to run is really different in each co-op. I've heard a lot of stories of people like some cooperatives have rules that if you've ever paid your bill late, you're not eligible to be on the board. And so if you were like 19 and in college and had a late electric bill, you can never sit on your board of directors. Sometimes they won't tell you why you're ineligible. We just this year had like multiple candidates in one of the districts we're working with got rejected from the nominating committee, and all the nominating committee said was that they're ineligible. They won't give you specifics why. So there's a lot of information that you'll need to start getting engaged with these elections. But we have a whole bunch of people who've been doing this for a long time, and I have a couple like best practices things I've been working on utility co-op elections this is my 4th election cycle, but the groups that I work with have been doing this for like 8-10 years. And so this is sort of like the model that we follow and have been working on for our time engaging in these. First step is research. Who's on your co-op board? You're gonna have allies and enemies and people that you need more information on. We just have coffee with them. Like, make sure you get to know every board member that's on your board. Sometimes people will be with you on some things and not on other things, and that's fine. But this will also give you information on like who is going to be the weakest link on the board, who can you replace, who's going to be the most important person for you to replace. And then you'll need to figure out when those people are up for election. Sometimes boards will have like multiple directors up at the same time. Some of our utility cooperatives have 3 people up every year. Some just have like 1 or 2 seats that go up every year. So that changes a lot. And then like pair that information with who you think is most likely to lose, and start making your plan from there. Figure out information on how you get on the ballot. I already mentioned nominating committees and eligibility, but something that we've been burned by weirdly a lot of times is district boundaries. These elections don't follow typical districts like Senate District O, House District 22. None of that is relevant here. So you're going to be going off these like weird shape files on their website that you can't actually zoom in on. So we've had like 2 times in the time that I've been organizing on this, where we'll have a candidate and we'll look at the map and be like, oh yeah, they totally live in that region. And then they'll apply to be on the ballot and we'll find out that they live like 1 street outside of the eligibility district, because we just can't like see that much detail on the map. So that's really annoying, but make sure you check. And then start to think about like what kind of candidate would win in your community. So as you're doing this research and getting to know your board members, obviously you're also getting to know your community. So I just took some screenshots of, this is from the cooperative that I'm a member of, Matanuska Electric Association. So there's like pictures of all of the board members and it has contact information for all of them. It also tells you like what kind of role they hold on the board. And so if they're the president, vice president, whatever. It has information about upcoming seats that are available. So just in this cooperative, we have some districted seats and some at-large seats. And all of the like elections changed because there was a bylaw change in 2020. So now there's this like irregular timeline of when people are getting on and off the board. So all of that, you just gotta do some digging and start to figure out what you know and what you don't know, and then find out who you need to bother to learn what you don't know. Next step is planning. We like to start small, protect incumbents that you like on the board, build trust with them, build trust with other community members. A big way that we win in these elections is by being unexpected. And so making sure you prioritize open seats. If a director steps off the board and there's an open seat opportunity, those are wonderful, because they're not running against an incumbent, or trying to like unseat unexpected incumbents. People who haven't had to run real campaigns in the past, people who like squeaked in last time with no opponent. Those are going to be the best people to try and get off the board when you're starting out. But once you make a big organizing push, then it's going to key off everyone that your group is working on these elections, and they're going to be ready for you the next time. That's something that we've seen in a lot of our communities is like, if we have a big win, then the next year there's like really strong opposition. And so kind of like play the game, make the long-term power map to see like who are the people that we really need to get out of here and how can we build trust with our allies and like figure out when the pieces will fall into place to get those people. This is the actual campaign timeline template that we use for our elections. So we write out like how many people we have in our member lists, what win number we have for each of our districts. So how many votes do we need to unseat people that are on the board? How many volunteers are we going to need to get that work done? And then we create like number goals for how many dials we're going to make, how many dials our volunteers are going to make, how many dials our candidates are going to make. If we're contracting in support for these races, how many dials, how many doors are those people working on? And then go through this with your candidate, go through it with your volunteers, get everyone on the same page for like what your goals are and why you have them. And then you start organizing. We do for field campaign or like field portion of our campaigns, we do door knocking, phone banking, and text banking. And then for comms, we do mail pieces, both like traditional campaign mail and also like a typed letter from the candidate. We do digital ads, we do op-eds and LTEs, and then we do like community endorsements and events with our candidates and stuff like that. And I will now pass it off to Alex to talk a little bit more about what organizing looks like for these races.
Awesome. Thank you, Rachel. Appreciate all of that, like ground or like level setting, right? So we're on the same page about what these elections look like on a broader scale. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience working on them the past few years. But I want to talk about my introduction to utility elections, which happened before I was working in this role. I was like living in a place where I was paying my own electric bill, which I hadn't been before that for quite some time, and received a piece of mail that looked something like this and saw a bunch of Instagram and digital ads that looked sort of like this. And I was like, so immediately interested. And I like to say, like, I am the case study of the super voter who like cares about elections, is super engaged, but had no idea about utility elections. And that when I was like presented with this information through digital and mail ads, and maybe even a phone call, that I was like immediately so excited to get another opportunity to vote. I think there's lots of people in our communities like that, who once you want, and Rachel said, like, a lot of people don't know about these elections, right? But once you tell people about them, there is a whole group of people who are like eager to engage and participate in another way. So I think that's a nice and exciting thing. Yeah, thank you for switching to that slide. So I'm going to talk about so after I had like become a utility election voter, I then saw a role open where I was going to get to do clean energy advocacy, with some work directly with the utilities, both advocacy work throughout the year, which Rachel will talk about later, but then also the elections specifically. So last year was my first introduction to really being very hands-on in running one of these races. And one of the other things I wanted to flag, like Rachel mentioned that by working with incumbents, we can like build trust in our role in participating in these elections. And I was lucky to start this position at a time when two incumbents were running for re-election who were also strong allies on the board. So that's this imagery of Mark Wiggin and Sam Kaysen. And they had both been on the board, and Sam was the chair and had led the board to vote in favor of something that our organizing community really cares about, which is a renewable portfolio standard. So these were, and Mark had voted in favor as well. And so strong allies, which is great as somebody who was like new to that organizing role, to be able to work with incumbents and like not come in, be brand new, be introducing myself and be trying to unseat an incumbent. So that feels important. And so want to talk a little bit about what it's like to actually work with candidates. And part of the reason that I wanted to highlight this here is that, these are not restricted like political elections, and that means that we may have organizations or groups of people working on these things that are not super experienced with the way that like political election work happens, which is great, but also means like you might not know what it is like to work with a candidate. And basically what I want to say is that candidates are people too. So let me walk through a little bit of what I'm thinking about here. So trust is crucial, both in the sense of like, yes, establishing trust with who you are and the role you're playing in the community and in the election, but also like with these individuals that you're going to be supporting. So if you are planning to endorse them and work on their campaigns, to have regular meetings, especially early on, and to identify things that you can like demonstrate your like commitment and trustworthiness early by like having specific things that you follow through on. Like, I'm going to get you, a draft of this piece of mail or a draft of this campaign plan or whatever. These like early on planning things that Rachel started to talk about, like, are opportunities to establish and build trust with your candidate. And you should have consistently throughout the campaign open lines of communication. So when I say regular meetings, I mean, like, are you agreeing to meet every week during the campaign? Great. But also being able to pick up the phone and text or call your candidate at any time and feel confident that you're going to get a response. And doing that, all of that work as early as possible. Rachel mentioned like just having coffees with board members, not even while you're doing the actual election, but just to get a sense of the lay of the land. Like, all of these early on relationship building things are really important so that when you are in the middle of a campaign and things are coming up, that you have like trust and a strong relationship that you can fall back on to get through. Competing commitments. So yeah, I wanted to talk about that because like even in this race, when you're in a 4-6 week timeline, whatever it is for your utility board, people have other things in their lives. We are maybe working on this full time or maybe not, but this is like a big focus for us. It's our paid focus, but for folks running for the board, like, they also have families. They often have other full-time jobs. They, have other things, and especially working with incumbents, like, they're also members of the board and have responsibilities to carry out as members of the board beyond just running for re-election. And so I think just like remembering that things will come up, and they did come up as I worked with Mark and Sam, where, they had other things going on in their lives and they weren't always available for campaign related events. And that, like, again, ties back to early and often conversations, so you have shared expectations. Communications. I wanted to talk about this because, in particular, in working with incumbents, you might have someone who's really, really strong communicator in the boardroom, who is really excellent about talking about some of the technical language, and knows Robert's rules, knows how to get through a board meeting, can run a really tight meeting, can lead votes on certain things, whatever it is, but they may not be as comfortable communicating as a candidate to a broader group of people who are less plugged into that like technical energy world. And I think that is, something that it can be difficult to talk about, to like give feedback on. And I think, like, again, going back to establishing trust early on and establishing a relationship where you feel like you can say like, hey, I noticed that like this speech to this group didn't really seem to resonate. Like, can we talk about like how you're going to talk to the group next time? Offering things like trainings or support, or connecting them to other candidates who have run, who are really successful communicators, who might be able to offer like direct firsthand experience, because sometimes that can feel better than hearing it from like an organizer. Disagreement. I want to talk about this. So while we were working on this campaign, we were really excited. And again, like, Mark and Sam had been allies on the board. They took a vote on a different issue that we care about, and we were not happy with the way that they voted. And I think just like remembering that disagreement is normal, and like, right, they're people, we don't always see eye to eye. When we make endorsements, we're making endorsements because we think like, this is the person who is going to do the most good for my issues, who I see I'm the most aligned with, but we're not being unrealistic and thinking we're going to be perfectly aligned on every single issue from now until the end of time. Like, that's just not how people work. And so being able to move through disagreement, whether it's about an issue area or it's just like a disagreement about how you're going to do a campaign tactic, is important. And I think in this case, when we were able to sit down in person and have a conversation and, hear where they were coming from on the vote and explain where we were coming from, and get to a point where then we could say, okay, we don't agree on this, but we're ready to move on to the next part of the campaign, and we still are committed to this campaign, feels really important and is not always easy. So yeah, that's that. And if you could go to the next slide. Recruitment dynamics, a picture of me making phone calls. So that was last year's election, working with 2 incumbents. This year, there is an open seat. And again, grateful that I got to do incumbents before an open seat, because I do think that makes it a little bit easier in a number of ways. And so, yeah, it's a really different dynamic when you are asking people to run for something versus just supporting who's already running. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what that experience has been like. I basically started by asking people to run, people who are in the community, who have run before, who we know, who we think would be strong candidates, and then asking those people to run themselves, and also asking them like, okay, well, if you don't want to run, who would you want me to ask? And like branching out and doing that sort of like classic organizing work of like, all right, I'm going to talk to 5 people and ask them who the 5 people I should be talking to are, and just have lots and lots of phone calls, lots and lots of coffees, get feedback on the people, and kind of this cyclical thing until someone is willing, able, ready, and also aligned with our values, who wants to run. I wanted to mention like and I don't have any of it in front of me, but there's certainly research on like the difference between when you're asking someone who comes from like a dominant culture versus a culture that is historically oppressed, whether they're as comfortable jumping on the opportunity to run when they're asked. Like some people you have to ask many, many times before they're ready to run. Some people you ask once and they're ready. And I want to name that there are things we can do in both just regularly asking people to run for our office, whether it's a utility election or otherwise. Like that is an important way to like move that needle along for people who like maybe need to be asked more than once before they're ready to think about it. But also beyond just the ask, offering like very tangible support in that decision making. So one of the things I did was draft up like a sample campaign plan in like great detail of like, here is exactly what we would do if you were interested in running, and like these are the days you can expect. I mean, obviously, they're fake dates. We would adjust them later if we were actually going to work with a person, but like you can expect this many days of door knocking and this many days of phone banking. We would send out 2 pieces of mail, walking through with them like, this is what it actually means to run for a seat like this. And also, again, like using it as an opportunity to connect people to mentors, whether it's like somebody else who's run before, somebody else who's currently on the board who like has the same cultural context, who can share their experience of what this is like. And yeah, just like connecting people who can support them directly in making that decision and like understanding what they're committing to. And I said, like, bringing light to the process here. Yeah, this is like, these in particular utility elections are not, because they're not like publicly regulated, they are really mysterious if you have not done them or been involved in some way. And so like walking them through exactly what to expect is really important before someone's able to say yes. And then on the other end of it, once you've done all this work of like asking so many people and building this big network of people who are now interested, navigating a crowded field. When you have an open seat, you're likely to have multiple candidates file to run, and some of them may be aligned, and some of like you might end up in a situation where you have multiple aligned candidates on the ballot, and you don't want to have voters who you're aligned with be split between 2 parties while you have like an opposition candidate who's really strong. And so it's a lot of more just like classic organizing conversations, having direct conversations with potential candidates to say, both of you are really strong candidates, but we want to make sure we have one strong candidate on the board on the ballot this year. And so, are either of you willing to step back and maybe run next year, encouraging candidates to have that conversation directly with each other, and ideally getting to a place where you have like one strong candidate who you and your organizing community feel aligned around. And that's it for me. So I'll pass it off. Thanks.
Well, thanks, Alex and Rachel. I wish I had this information a year ago. This is my second cycle dealing with Rural Electric Co-op elections. So I'm David Stokely, work for Renew Missouri, part-time in Southwest Missouri. Go ahead, next slide. We're located that kind of brownish blob in the lower left corner of this map, Southwest Missouri. We're primarily a rural conservative area in a mostly rural conservative state. Next slide. The demand, and I'll say that I've been a proud member owner of my rural electric co-op, the Ozark Electric Co-op, for 40 years. So, this is my co-op. I literally have ownership of this election and these folks. So, that definitely increases my interest in it. So there was a demand charge announcement. Actually, it occurred in December of 23. It was implemented in April of 24. And the best explanation that they had was, well, just don't use two appliances at once and you'll be fine. Well, that didn't really turn out to be the case because people couldn't understand what the demand charge was, and even worse, they couldn't control it. So anybody on auto pay or, just lack of involvement, didn't read their monthly magazines. They didn't even know they had a price increase till the next bill and then the next bill. So April, May, June, people started going, hey, my bill went up 30%. And I'm not using any more electricity. So it was very poorly rolled out, very poor communication. And but one good thing came out of this, it did skyrocket interest and involvement in people's co-op. Next slide. So this is actually a little graphic from the Associated Electric Co-op, and they are our G&T, generation and transmission co-op. Basically, there's certainly a coordinated campaign that I see running through all of our three levels of co-op, our three tiers of co-op in Missouri, and Associated. They love beautiful, clean coal. There's just nothing you can say about that. And they really are very resistant to any change. Why change now? It's been working for us. And it ends up being just an all-out assault on solar and renewables in general, and very protective of the status quo. Next slide. This is a cute little graphic of poor Grandma Millie, and who doesn't love their Grandma Millie, and Uncle Rich. Looks like someone that we might know that's very rich, but next slide. And poor Grandma Millie is paying way bigger share of her grid expenses than Uncle Rich is. It can afford, solar and, so on and so forth. And so he's avoiding fairness. He's not paying his fair share. Next slide. So one thing that happened in this interim, again, April, May, June, the members themselves formed a Facebook group, and there was lots and lots of discussion. There ended up being about 2,500 members on this Facebook group before it recently got deleted. And that's a little bit of another story, but Next slide. And out of this, 3 new candidates emerged, and their simple, really main message was no demand. There was certainly some other issues they talked about, but as you can see from the t-shirts, next slide. And these were candidate generated flyers or handouts that they made, and no demand was certainly very prominent in everything they did. So it was a very simple, very direct message. People were mad as hell, and they weren't going to take it anymore, and they did not like this new demand charge that they could not control and could not understand. So three candidates emerged out of this. Okay, next slide. And then how did the co-op react during all this? Well, they ended up having a series of 3 meetings at different locations on different days. And it ended up being a pretty interesting deal. Next slide. Actually, we got TV coverage, media coverage was excellent. A bunch of angry citizens voicing their outrage over this. And next slide. The rooms were pretty well packed, standing room only, at all 3 different locations on different weeks. Next slide. And again, all through this, the Facebook group was bubbling and ginning up a lot of discussion, and as typical as social media, but it did serve as a very valuable venue for people to discuss, and for the 3 new candidates that were running against incumbents to get their message out. Next slide. Just another, again, just packed rooms, different locations. The big day came finally, and this was the end of late July of 24, so a year ago. So attendance was just pretty amazing. I would say it nearly doubled. And up to this point, ever since 1927, I think, when the co-op was formed, this is an annual meeting in person. And if you wanted to vote, you had to show up and you had to wait in line. And you got to vote between 10:30 and 1:30 on that one day. And that was the only way you could vote. So typically the co-op, one way or the other, could choose their candidates, and just for you draw a circle around the headquarters of the co-op, and again, a lot of the employees, staff, administration, families, so on and so forth, linemen, they came to the meetings. And next slide. And you can kind of tell it's a lot of people. They serve a decent little steak sandwich, and have some exhibits and things, and hand out little door prizes. But you can see certainly some elderly people standing in line, and these lines did not go fast. So people are standing. You can see a woman in a leg brace, and I think people with small children, and patience is thin. Physical stamina is limited, and so it's just been a challenge to get turnout outside of that little 10-mile circle around the headquarters, really, on this day. And so it's been a very status quo, protected, circle the wagons, and foregone conclusion for the most part. I had resigned myself to working with the incumbents, and that would have been fine. I knew some of them are my friends and neighbors. But the tidal wave of anger had emerged at this meeting in July of 24. So next slide. No, there was a drive-through option. If you didn't want to stand in line, you could sit in your car and drive through. So there was drive-through voting and in person, check on the computer voting. So I will say one thing that they changed this year is we're going to be able to vote in person, but we have a week to do it before the annual meeting. So that's at least a slight change. My opinion, I can pay my bill online. I can mail my bill in with a check. If I can do that, I don't know why I can't vote the same way. Security shouldn't be any higher for my vote to be mailed in or done, electronically than it would be for my payment to the co-op. So I, at least kudos for some small incremental changes. And so we have a week to vote this year. And again, the annual meeting is near the end of July. So we'll see how that change goes, if that's good for the incumbents or not. Next slide. So the outcome of that meeting was that 3 incumbents lost and 3 new board members got swept in. And I don't know that has happened very many places, very many other times. It certainly was a earthquake, and you could see the absolute devastation to the members of the, I'll just say old guard or the existing board of directors on the stage. They basically said goodbye to 3 men that they knew very well, and welcomed in 3 new men that they didn't know and looked on with suspicion. And who are these guys that have broken into our domain? So it was a big deal, a big frickin' deal, to quote our former vice president. So the blame game started immediately that day, and fingers have been pointing a year later. Fingers are still being pointed, and I know you can't read this. I'll pick out a couple little tidbits. This is from our general manager, who has been with the co-op his entire career, and seems to dislike solar and seems to really like the status quo and fossil fuel. So he starts out by saying, I don't own solar, and says, why not? And talks about reliability is very important. And solar is not that product. He wants 24 hours a day all year. And he says that, I know there's supporters of solars out there. He says that's completely fine. But he comes back and says it's an intermittent form of electricity, and says the co-op's there to back you up. And believe me, there are challenges and risks to our cooperative being able to serve as your backup. And he says that's for another article to talk about that. But the last paragraph, he says, now there are folks out there that want to push an agenda that forces Ozark Electric Cooperative to engage more aggressively with the pursuit and adoption of solar and other intermittent forms of electric generation, and abandon what's most reliable. There are special interest groups and solar producers that are recruiting and campaigning for certain members to become elected as directors on our board. Solar, I encourage you to please keep an eye out for these folks and watch their attitude, actions, and words concerning your cooperative and its future. Make sure reliability is their second priority, right behind safety. And I have no idea. I've asked a few people, does that even make sense, that last sentence? So, again, they haven't gotten over being chafed from last year, and they're accusing us of creating all this when I've said, if I had this kind of power, I'd be the president of the United States right now. They created this, they own it, and they still don't seem to understand that they are the ones that created this issue that got 3 new board members on their board. And this is, like I said, this is my second cycle. There's 9 members on the board of directors, and every year, 1/3 of them are up for election. So this year we have another 3 seats that are open. We have as far as I know, we have an incumbent running unopposed, and then we have 2 other districts that there are insurgent candidates, I guess is what I'd refer to them, and running against an incumbent. So there's 3 seats, and 2 incumbents have opponents. The most ironic thing to me on this article is all of this assault salvos against renewables and clean energy comes right on the top of the page for their rate increase that they promised would not happen in 2025. We're looking at I think it's about a 20% increase in our rates on kilowatt hours. So last year we got about a 30% increase for the demand charge, which is pretty set. It has not varied on my bill. It's about a 30% increase on my bill last year. And this looks like it'll be about a 20% increase, which they promised the demand charge would forestall future rate increases. And just yesterday in my mailbox came the annual report from the co-op. And there's a full page message from our board president. And I'll just pick out a couple things from that, talking about ensuring reliable power for the future. And he repeats many of the same talking points about the challenges and having capacity, and talks about renewable energy, depends on weather conditions. And whereas traditional power is steady and predictable, threatens rolling blackouts or energy shortage during peak periods, and something we simply cannot allow. They're working closely with their suppliers, and they're advocating for policies that support balanced energy, quote unquote. So, mentions avoiding subsidies and shifting costs unfairly, and refer back to, Uncle Rich not paying his fair share. And then his last paragraph is devoted to says, unfortunately, special interest groups continue pushing for policies that would give certain members a financial advantage at the expense of others. Again, parroting the fairness issue. Talks about net metering not being fair and distributed generation policies, solar and renewables. They just cannot allow these policies to be unfair and not paying your fair share. And again, talks about higher rates, threatens various things, and promises that they want to ensure that power remains reliable and their future remains bright. So, we're dealing with a very strong status quo. The wagons are certainly circled. They really do not want anyone new on this board that has an outside perspective getting a toehold. And so we have 3 new members that were elected last year, and again, nobody owns them. They speak their mind. They take the responsibilities seriously, and there's a possibility for 2 new members to be elected this year. So that would be 5 out of 9. Potentially with a fresh perspective. We have several of these board members that literally inherited a patriarchal inheritance. Their fathers were board members for 30 or 40 years, and then some of them have been board members for 30 or 40 years. So it's a pretty solid, good old boy system, and don't expect them to give up easily. So that's my spiel.
Yeah, thank you, David. We're gonna switch over for a short case study, third case study from Rachel, and then we're gonna go into questions. We are gonna probably run a little bit long today. Just know that this session is being recorded, and we'll be sending out the recording after the fact. And Aaron's going to put a link in the chat to the canvas, which we are using to collect all the recordings from every single session. So you can go back and find a human edited transcript, the slide decks from each one, and the video recordings on Canvas. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Rachel.
Thank you, Tom. And thanks, David, for sharing that story. That was crazy. I'm constantly reminded how grateful to be up here that we have like term limits at most of our cooperatives and online voting available. Just wild stuff that you're dealing with down there. So thank you for sharing that. I will be quick so we can have time for questions. I just wanted to mention a couple things about how our work changes after the elections are done and like some of the impacts that we've seen from engaging in these elections over the years. Our big like organizing moment that we're working under right now in Alaska is that our natural gas shares are running out. So we have a monopoly called Hillcorp that owns all the natural gas in the state, and they stated a couple of years ago that they're not going to be able to keep fulfilling contracts that they have with our utilities. So about 80% of our energy is going to need to be replaced within the next 4 years. And there's not really a plan in place for that to happen. People are talking about importing natural gas. They're talking about adding coal power. They're talking about renewables a little bit. And so one of the big things we've been working on has been passing a renewable portfolio standard, like Alex mentioned earlier. And as a result of organizing in these elections and flipping some seats and getting a lot of members out for advocacy, we actually have two of our two largest utilities in the state have passed resolutions to support that renewable portfolio standard, which has been huge for us. And another statewide policy that we were working on was community solar, which passed last year. Alex and their team at the Alaska Center had a huge part to play in this, but the co-ops that some of our folks are organizing in are opening up community solar programs now. And there's some net metering legislation that folks are working on. So just kind of a reminder that these board members don't just impact their own cooperative, they also impact the state. Accountability is key both from you to your board member, but also from your board members to any other body that they engage with. We've found out in a lot of different settings that the staff at the utility and the board members at the utility are often telling different stories to different people. And so we've had our board members trying to like step up and keep their staff accountable to them. That impacts things at the state legislature, our regulatory commission of Alaska, and also Congress. Like we've been trying to work with the board members that we have allyship with to hold all of those positions in accountability with them and like make sure that they're expressing their own interests to those people. So just like some other things to consider how these elections can impact not just your own community, but your whole state. And I'm done. So I think I'm going to stop sharing the screen and we can do questions.
Excellent. Thank you for that. I'm just going to bring back our panelists real quick. Wonderful. So there are some questions coming in the chat. I'm going to start with Micah, who asked earlier today, earlier in the session, I should say, how do you learn more about running for a co-op? So if there is intentional lack of access to information and or a potential for a retaliatory board. And I'll just let any one of you want to jump in. Whoever wants to jump in first.
Yeah, I'll say something, and then if either of you have something to add, that'd be great. But I'll just say, like, at least at the co-ops that I've been like engaging on, they usually have like a staff member who's in charge, or a team of staff members who are in charge of like running the elections, and there may be like certain requirements around like information to members because they have to have a certain number of members participate in order for it to be valid. Anyway, identifying who the staff members are who hold that information, who manage elections, so that you can ask them for information, I think is like a useful, depending on how open the staff member is, a useful way to like not have to ask the board directly.
Thanks for that, Alex. Anybody else want to jump in on that question, or?
It can be a sticky wicket.
Yeah.
Tread, wade into the water, stick your toe in and wade in slowly. Or just jump in. Either way, whatever your personality is.
Yeah, I think
Guns blazing.
this is the piece where I mentioned like starting small. Like if you're going for the board president your first time, who's like in leadership on the Republican Party and like used to be a state senator, like whatever it is, it's going to be a big, big backlash for sure.
It's a big hill to climb.
Yeah. So that's where that power mapping is really important that was mentioned earlier, figuring out what are the relationships between the people on the board and who is a harder or a softer target, essentially. And especially, as was mentioned, when there is no incumbent running, going full force at those because they're an easier race to win, depending on who else is jumping in those sessions as well. Another question from Peg. Do you have a budget for what it costs to run a candidate generally? What amount of money should folks plan for if they're interested in jumping in, or if they want to support somebody else and doing recruitment to be able to explain what it actually costs to run for a co-op board seat?
Ours varies a lot depending on where we're running the election and like how many people you need to vote. We've flipped seats with like $2,000-3,000, just like 2 mail pieces and some digital ads. But in some of our co-ops where we have like all at-large seats and they're in really big areas, you need to talk to like 50-60,000 people. And so then your budget can get really big really quickly. I think some of our races can get up to like the $20,000-30,000.
Really?
Not, I guess, like maybe not the campaign, like certain staff time and like all those things. So it really depends on what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
I would throw in that you, maybe it's been mentioned, I didn't catch it, that you need to get a hold of the bylaws and you need to read the bylaws and you need to memorize, and like Bible verse, you need to know every comma, and if there's anything vague in there. Our co-op actually changed the bylaws, and several Missouri co-ops changed their bylaws to make disclosure, any campaign disclosures, any outside influence. And again, on some of the things that I read, they're certainly hyper vigilant. And so just be careful that you know the rules going in if you're raising money or if you're using your own money. I don't know, again, what like it was mentioned earlier, every co-op's different. So read your bylaws and know them, especially for your candidate and those types of things, and what's allowed, what's not allowed.
Yeah. And David, can you speak to an average cost for the three seats that were run last year in Missouri?
It varied between the 3 candidates. One guy, depends on if you count your time and travel. The oldest guy of the 3 had political experience and knew how to kiss babies and shake hands and go to every little community event and barbecue in the district. And in our co-op, you had to get your signatures within your sub-district, but everybody in the co-op got to vote. Mm-hmm. So, there was quite a bit of travel involved. So it can be I would say sky's the limit on, again, like Rachel said, it kind of depends on where you live. If you've got handful of rural folks, then hey, you can do some mailers or phone calls, texts, door to door, or you can really get into expensive stuff. I mean, obviously, I think everybody realizes how obscene everything school board races and nonpartisan races have become. So this is kind of the next frontier, I suppose.
Yeah, and kind of a follow-up to that one, you talked about needing to be really clear about bylaws and sometimes financial disclosures. It sounds like from your experience, David, in Missouri, the work that you were doing in Renew Missouri, coming in and supporting, was triggering the existing board to identify y'all as being a special interest group and what have you. Have you seen issues with like outside corporations, fossil fuel interests, pouring money into any of these seat elections yet? And if so, have there been disclosures around that or not? And that would be a question for all three of our panelists.
It's obvious to me that the sheet music is being handed out is kind of how I like to refer to it from some central source. And, they have conspiracy theories about us and obviously conspiracy theories about them. And, it's obvious to me that, the status quo is at stake in Missouri, and it's going to be very jealously defended. And you need to understand, what that means. And again, that's going to vary depending on where you are. I it, it it's clear to me that the the general manager, for him to accuse outside agitators of coming in and basically saying anyone that's a solar candidate, quote unquote, is the enemy kind of thing, and make sure you don't vote for them. That's just inappropriate as anything. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know
Well,
if that answers the question
how
or
about
not.
in Alaska is very well known for having a lot of oil interests. Have you seen any of that in Alaska?
Yeah. It just depends on like what communities are working on it. We have this like core group of like congressional candidates and things like that who will like co-host fundraisers with some of our oppositional candidates, who are backed by like oil and are in that big conservative bubble of people. But I think, like David said, like they have those assumptions about us. We have those assumptions about them. Like they have really nice, well put together websites, and so it's easy to be like, okay, yeah, there's definitely someone working on that race. But it's hard to know. We have no reporting requirements at all, and so we have no actual idea who is doing that work.
No. And have any of you done any work with unions or union representatives, and in relation to board elections or running for board seats?
Yeah, we do try to have open communication specifically with the unions that are involved in making endorsements in these races. And I think like from our perspective, we know that like that is something that really matters to labor partners of ours who's on these boards and what their positions are toward organized labor in these spaces. And so what we've done at at our org is like when we make an endorsement, we ask a question about how the candidate feels about organized labor, even though it's not our direct issue area. But because we know, of course, this is like something we are like values aligned with, wanting to support organized labor, but like also strategically, it's important that we are not bringing a candidate who organized labor is going to aggressively oppose. So that's sort of, I guess, our approach there. And we've had some like open conversations with unions about candidates.
Anyone else want to say anything about that subject before we move on to No. Okay.
We have not. I live in a very rural conservative area, so if someone wanted to wave a union flag or save the planet renewable energy flag, it'd probably be more of a negative than a positive. So
Got it.
We have been accused of working with the teachers union, which I think is funny because like why them of all the unions? But
And why is that somehow an accusation?
right, yeah.
Yeah. Something to be accused of. Um, I'm wondering, is there anything that that you feel like can be done or that you've seen done to increase the transparency around these electric co-op elections? And as a kind of a follow-up or add-on, um, is there mechanisms to ensure accountability and address wrongdoing? Like, is there any other kind of like outside entities that monitor these things that stuff can get reported to? Yeah, just leave that one out there.
This is going to be a really annoying answer, but the only thing that we've ever made progress with on like specifically transparency and accountability is having someone when a moment happens that people are pissed off about, like what David's scenario was, like something really bad happens and everyone's really angry, getting someone in whose like number one priority is transparency, and then they, once they're in there, can start like chipping away at that stuff. Like having big engagement from members on that's how like we've gotten online voting, how we've gotten public meeting access, how we've gotten people to report on minutes and stuff. Like all of that has been because of engagement and like replacing board members who are standing in the way.
Not an annoying answer at all. That's a great answer. And another good reason to run candidates. We are, just about 10 minutes over time. So I want to make sure we're able to wrap up. And I guess what I wanted to ask all of you as a final question is there something that you feel like now that you've learned, doing this work that you wish you knew, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, that you would want to impart to somebody else that was either interested in running for their board or supporting a candidate that was going to run for the board? And maybe we'll start with David and work our way to Alex next, and then finish with Rachel.
well, you would think the oldest guy would know the most, but again, all the stuff, the nuts and bolts stuff that Rachel and Alex went through is wonderful. And that's what, candidates are hungry for. Nobody is born to politics. And whether this is, politics, I guess you got to call it politics. Nobody is a born politician. You learn, and you don't always win the first time. Just because you didn't win the first time, I would just encourage people to stay in the fight and stay with it. As far as some golden nugget, if I knew one, I'd write a book and I'd be rich.
Thanks, David. And Alex?
Yeah, I don't feel like I have a golden nugget either. I Yeah, I think like what I would say to folks who are just getting started in this world is that like there are so few members of the public typically who attend board meetings in person, and I would say that's like one of the most useful ways to read the room of like, oh, who is actually talking to who, but also like familiarize yourself to members of the board. And I think that is like one of the biggest impact things you can do early on is just like attend a few board meetings in person and listen.
We're not allowed to do that.
What?
We're not allowed to attend the meetings or closed door. You can ask to speak, and they'll want to know what you're going to say, and then they'll thank you and have you leave the room. So, yeah,
Do you have an open meetings act in your state? Is it?
doesn't apply to co-ops apparently.
Wow.
Yeah, it's great.
David, you're doing the Lord's work down there. Right? Wow.
That's not what they say.
Working on these elections is what got me like started on working on elections in general, which is now my like full-time job is just like contract campaign work for these and for other elections. And I think like the biggest like I am a STEM person. My background is in STEM things, and I think like seeing the equation was like the biggest key for me to like just recognize like the amount of output that you can have with these races. And so like my thing that I wish I would have known the first time that I started is that like these are really serious and can be super impactful. And if you put in like if you find the right moments and like put in the work, it can have just like crazy um cascading effects from there. And so like if anyone is wondering if this is like the place to invest your energy, it's just been like so obvious to me that these elections have huge impacts, not just on your utility or your community, but like your state and the narrative of people in around you, how they think about their energy and how they talk about it to other people and how they can like engage in other levels of leadership and like politics and stuff in your community.
Well, that's a wonderful way to end it. Thank you for that call to action. And thank you to all of our speakers, to Rachel and Alex and David. Thank you everyone who showed up and posted questions in the chat. We will be back next week. There's a link to next week's session in the chat as well. We'll be discussing public funding for electric co-ops and how to engage with policymakers. We'll have Lloyd Ritter who's the founder and managing partner at Green Capital, Eric Hadelstad, the director of Rural Cooperative Energy at Cure, and Chris Woolery, Energy Projects Coordinator for Mountain Association. There's also just a few other links in there. Again, we're going to be posting the recording to Canvas, and the human edited transcript will go up early next week. You'll also be able to get the slides and everything there. And if you've got a minute to spare and want to give us a little bit of feedback about this session, about any of the other sessions, there is a survey that's the last link in the chat as well. It really helps us. We're going to be pulling together all of the kind of learnings from this session, from all of the sessions, and putting together a new Rural Electric Cooperative organizing toolkit that will be coming out later this summer. And we'll make sure that everybody who's registered for any of these events will get a link to that when that is ready. And if you're interested in following up with us, sending an email to info@ruralpower.us is the best way to get in touch. I think Aaron's going to drop that link into the chat right now. And if you have any questions about Canvas or kind of about this collab or about Rural Power Coalition, we're going to keep this room open for about 5 more minutes to answer some questions. And then final pitch to please sign on to our sign-on letter about rehiring staff for the LIHEAP program. We're trying to get those signatures, that sign-on letter submitted by the end of the day on Thursday, because this is a very small window to be able to get some influence on who's hired back, who's been fired from HHS. I'll say that in the last 24 hours, we now have over 150 organizations that have signed on to this letter. Our initial goal is to get a minimum of 100. Now we're going for 200. So if you would please talk to your organization, link's been put back into the chat for that one. And just know we're trying to get that out in the next 48 hours. So with that, I'll say thank you and hope to see everybody again next week. And like I said, if you have any questions, stick around.